Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are across the planet. My name's Sam, and welcome to Creation Conversations. Joe isn't here today. I am filling in as host because, his signal is patchy in yon country land. But not to worry, we're going to make do. We've got the whole team here, bar Joe. So we've got Dr. Glenn Wilson, we've got Craig Hawkins, we've got Dr. Diane Eager, and of course our international director John Mackay. How are you guys doing?
Well, I'm all right over here in Australia. How are you, Diane?
I'm well, thanks.
Good. How about you, Glenn?
I'm at the best of all. I'm at my sister's in Orange Beach on the Gulf Coast.
Sounds lovely.
Lovely. You look like you're well set there, Glenn, in a nice, comfy bed. I'm slightly envious, but there you go. But how you down in Tassie, Craig?
Yeah, really good. Good to be back after a week off.
Oh, there you go. Did you get up to anything exciting? Are we going to hear about that in the ministry report?
Yeah. Hope to show a little rough video that I've put together, but should be fun.
All righty. Okay. Well, who wants to kick us off with our ministry update then?
Well, you better tell us first which country yon Joseph is in. We didn't hear that.
Oh, he's in the UK, but he's just in. I believe he's in the UK, as far as I know. I hope he hasn't suddenly changed plans and gone to like Korea or something. No, it's unfortunately Joe isn't with us today. But it's all good because I am the host of the show. I will fill in for Joe. I've got a little bit of a beard going, not as quite as impressive as Joe's, but there you go, or John's for that matter, or Glenn. Oh, there you go. I'm on the lowly bottom rung of the beards of the channel. Craig's the only one without a beard, but I think. Have you ever thought about sporting a beard, Craig?
No, not really.
Okay, and with that ends that conversation.
Well, Sam, that was the best avoidance technique I've seen in ages. I think we better tell them where Joseph actually is in Norfolk, somewhere out there in the wilds. You know, when we go to Norfolk as a visitor, to me, it's on the road to nowhere. You can't go anywhere once you get there, basically. So Joe's got real trouble with his signal. He and I tried to talk together yesterday. But Diane, I believe you're kicking us off with a ministry report.
Yes, we were going to send out a newsletter this week, but we weren't able to. So you can look forward to some interesting things. But in the meantime, you might like to take the opportunity to sign up to the newsletter, which you can do on our main website. There's a page for it, and it is free. So if you do that, you not only get the things that we talk about in Creation Conversations, but we put in links to other resources that are related to whatever topic we've spoken about, and links to any questions that we might have on the question and answer site as well. So it's worth actually getting that, even if you see the bits we talk about it in Creation Conversations after we've sent it out. So if you do that, you can look forward to reading about the oldest fossil bat skeleton, and we'll bring you some more details about that next week. And you can also get in on the debate about where the Earth's water came from. But if you watch the rest of this program, you'll know that where the Earth's water came from. But it's interesting to see the debates that are going on in the background that we keep a watching brief of in the scientific news, because sometimes we can just stand on the sidelines and say, well, actually, guys, you're both wrong. But anyway, we will report about that and the sort of how we can see things, the same results from a biblical point of view. And we also have links to the relevant things in the fact file, which is where we archive things. So even if you haven't been getting our newsletter, you haven't missed out on what's been going out in it. We archive all of the science reports as separate items, so you don't need to know which newsletter they went out in. You can just do a keyword search for them. So interesting things to come if we can go back to us.
There you go. Sorry. I was trying. I'm doing multiple things here. I'm hosting and
Yes,
I'm
I
also
can
doing
see
this.
that.
So please bear with me in the chat. It's good to see you all here as well. Already chatting
Good.
away. Hello, chatsters.
Mm.
Okay, who is next for our ministry report?
That
I
would be
believe there
me.
you go, Glenn. Take it away, Glenn.
All right, give me a chance to call this up. If I can remember how to do this, if I do this right, so just give me a minute.
All right then. And while I'll fill in whilst Glenn's getting on the PowerPoint presentation. If you do want to sign up, it is completely free for the newsletter. We do really encourage you guys to sign up. You get lots of great nuggets in there, and gives you a nice sort of update as to what's going on with creation research, some of the stuff in the news that you may have seen, how we address that. So it really is a great resource, and it's completely free. You don't have to pay for it. So that again, it's like extra creation conversations. How can you go wrong with that? Glenn, I believe your PowerPoint is now up, so I'm going to put that full screen for you. And whenever you're ready, take it away.
All right, so this week was a big week for a couple of things. One, we had a homeschool group. Well, I say it's a homeschool group. I found out it was from different regions. So it sounds like it was multiple homeschool groups that coordinate together activities. And they came to our house, and I was able to speak to them about creation. Started off with talking about the Bible and reading to them out of the Genesis account about the flood and how the flood changed everything that we see today. Showed them different evidences of rocks from different sedimentary layers and talked about how these layers were laid down one on top of the other, and to show that there's a lack of bioturbation. I have in the middle picture here, what I'm holding up is a cast of ant channels. When I was at the University of Tennessee, I did a lot of work on dye staining of ant channels, even some casting of ant channels. But this one was provided to me from a friend. And then I also showed them plant roots. And we talked about how between the layers that you see, such as along the Grand Canyon, there isn't any of this bioturbation. So clearly these layers were laid down rapidly, one behind the other. And then we talked about many other things, how quickly rocks can form, how quickly fossils can form, and then talked to them about the most important fossil that I have, and that is a thorn fossil, a fossil of the thorns, and how that secular geologists would say, well, this forms, these thorns were fossilized millions of years before humans came into existence, which we know from the Bible that first there was man, God created man, and then man sinned, and thorns were the result of the curse. So you can have one or you can have the other, but you can't put the two together as theistic evolutionists try to do. But what they really were looking forward to was finding fossils for themselves. So I knew this event was coming up for more than a year. And so I'd been collecting rocks from different layers, and even had a few from John had left me. And I spread those out, and we went through 3 different techniques for finding fossils. And one of those, certainly my wife Ruby's favorite, is to split rocks. That's because oftentimes I go over to the rock face and I pull off the rocks and I bring them to her, and she gets to find the fossils. So the kids got their hammers and chisels, and they got to splitting, and told them whatever they found they could keep, which of course they really loved. They had a great time. Even the little ones got involved, and they did get to find some pretty cool fossils. One of them made me regret that I told them they could keep whatever they find, because they found one really cool fossil. Then next we went, and I had set up different tubs with bones that I've also been collecting just so I could bury them. And then talk to them about how once you find it, you brush the sediment away very carefully, very slowly. That didn't always work with the little ones. Once they found the bone, they just were ready to go to it and just dig it up and pull it out. But they still had a good time practicing their technique. But the highlight of it, the thing that they were most looking forward to, was digging shark teeth. And it's something that Ruby and I did a lot of before we moved to our current home in Tennessee. When we lived in Mississippi, we would regularly go to the creeks and dig shark teeth and find all sorts of fossils. So what we did, we started taking 5-gallon buckets like this one here, filling it with sediment from the creek, and then bringing it back to our home. And then we just simulated a stream. We put some hay bales around. You can see hay bales, even ice chests, put plastic down, and then filled it up with the sediment that we collected. And then we just let them get in there and dig for the shark teeth, never knowing quite exactly what they might find, because we find all sorts of things, not just shark teeth. We find ray teeth, other types of fish teeth. We find alligator teeth, turtle scutes, all sorts of different fossils in there, not to mention many of the shells, like what Craig is going to show later. And we talked to them about what's interesting is that this streams that we got the materials from is 290 miles from the ocean and 430 feet above sea level. And we talked about how it's because of the global flood event. So they had a great time. I got my granddaughter in here, and she was my assistant. She's done a lot of shark teeth digging with us, so that way we could have 2 groups at a time. And then they got in there, and we just told them, you can keep whatever you find. But once they found 1 or 2, then we would move it on to the next group. And they had a ball. They did good. They didn't get everybody wet. I thought they would be splashing and falling down, but no, they were really good and well behaved, and just had a ball finding their own shark teeth themselves. Here you can just see one more of them. And not only did they get to take home the shark teeth they found, but we take the shark teeth that we've been finding and we make jewelry out of it, necklaces in particular. And so we sent them all home with a necklace that we had made from the shark teeth. So we'll have a shark tooth in resin and made into a necklace, which they loved. And then we got the moms into it. Well, we saved 1 bucket that came from a creek in the state of Arkansas. Much different material and much different looking shark teeth. And so the moms got a treat as well. And then they got to go home with their own fossils that they found. So it was a great success, great day. It was anywhere from around 25 kids that came in and were able to join us. And we had 1 11th grader, 1 that I think was 10th grade. Most of them were 6th grade on down to preschool. The other big event this week was, we've been telling the team that Ruby and I, we don't have a museum, but we would like to have a mobile museum. And that way we can travel around to different businesses, set up in their parking lot, display the fossils that we have, and talk to people, because we feel like it's more likely we will get to talk to people who don't go to church and who wouldn't go to church and who don't know Christ as their Lord and Savior. So while we were down here, we've been looking online for a couple of weeks. We've been praying about it for a while. And we found that most all the trailers come out of the state of Georgia. We'd have to drive to Georgia. We get down here to my sister's on the coast, and there's a person here who is buying the trailers out of Georgia, underselling all the market to try to put everybody out of business. So we said, well, let's go buy one, because we could get it from him cheaper than we could from the factory guy himself. So that's what we're up to. We're going to be driving this back with us, and then we're going to start building displays that we can put in the trailer, just take them out, set them up, and sit out there during the day in a parking lot. And as people go to the grocery store, they can come by and talk with us. So with that,
Awesome
I will
sauce.
Sam, you can go back to you.
Yeah, we're all good. We're all good. You're off your PowerPoint. All good. Do you have something else to show? Or
Oh yeah, just 1 second. Let me see if I can show you just some of the shark teeth that we find.
lovely.
This is a sand shark. Uh, that's a really nice one. This is the more typical one of tiger shark teeth. We find stingray quills there, but you never know what you're going to find because we do find alligator teeth, sawfish teeth, and one of my favorite though is the fish that eat on the coral. This is a jaw plate. This is probably one of the best
Oh, lovely.
jaw plates that I've seen. So it's a really nice one. And they got to find some ray teeth. The ray teeth, let me see if I can pull one up.
Glenn, while you're trying to find that, would you settle an issue for the watchers? Are you broadcasting in bed?
I am broadcasting in bed in the back room because, like I said, I'm at my sister's place, and this was the quietest room that we have.
All right.
Any excuse, Glenn. Any excuse.
If I go to sleep, you guys will understand why.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. If we hear soft, gentle snoring when John's giving his presentation later, we'll know exactly where it's coming from. All right. Is it Craig next? Who's doing the right? Okay, Craig. It's over to you.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Well, last weekend I wasn't on because we went on a field trip, which I'm going to show a brief video of in a moment. The couple of fossils I can show you sort of up close here. This is, sorry, this not other finger. This one here is Stropholosia, which is a really good example of a brachiopod that we hadn't previously had too many good examples of. So that's great. But we found a lot of those on our trip in really an unexpected location to start with. There's another really good example, a couple of species of brachiopods there as well.
Craig, brachiopods are normally found living where?
Oh, in the ocean. Yeah,
Right.
Sea creatures. Yeah, so it's we're well inland, up in the mountains actually, but there's some Phenostella. Is that the right angle there?
Pretty well. Point to the one in the bottom right-hand corner there. Yeah,
this
that's
one
right.
here. Well, there we go. So there's just a couple of samples. Just show you a couple of more of those in a moment. But also, just a little while ago, I haven't shown this one yet. Not sure how that comes up in the bright light I've got here. I'll just leave it like that. We can deal with that. But some of the regular watchers will know that I've been collecting fossil shells. I might just turn that light off and see how that comes up a little bit better there.
Yes,
so there's
that
a
is
fossil shell from the middle Miocene. So that's approximately 40 million years, they say. And here's one that we sell in our gift shop. Quite similar, not an exact match, but perhaps more similar than a Chihuahua is to a British Bulldog in their skulls. So that's not too bad, I reckon. Another little, perhaps after their kind match. I'll get that light back on. And if I can just get my slide up, Sam. So we put a new display up on the Bible. That Bible there is about a 170-year-old Bible that we were given at the museum. And it's a useful display because I think the Bible is a fantastic evidence in and of itself. Just last week, I had a lady coming through the museum who wanted to debate every scientific issue that you can imagine. But when I said to her, can I just read you something from the Bible? And I read her Psalm 22. And before I'd even finished, she said, oh, that's just talking about Jesus Christ. And I said to her, well, I agree with you, but it was written 1,000 years before he was born. And then she really went silent. And I was able to share how the Bible tells of Jesus Christ in advance in great detail. And this is a powerful evidence in and of itself. So she went quite quiet and was intrigued at that point. So we've got that little display up there. We've got a few more bits to add to it. And that's all I've got to show on that, Sam, if you want to get me back off and back onto full screen. But that's a great little one we've been able to add during the week. So, yeah, our field trip, it's pretty well self-explanatory. It was a pretty rough trip. We had a couple of dramas. And if Sam's ready to put that up. It's just 5 minutes. A little bit rough, so it's just on the mobile phone, but and my efforts at editing. Sam's done a couple of last second improvements to it, I think, but let's have a look at it.
I've just done some tweaks and changes. You did the legwork, Craig. Don't worry. Right, we'll play that now for you guys. Hope you enjoy.
The indomitable Creation fossil hunters set off in early April for the Upper Mersey River, Tasmania, an area nestled between the world-famous Cradle Mountain National Park and the Walls of Jerusalem National Park. The path chosen was via the rugged West Rowellan Track, four-wheel drive only territory, an adventure in the wading. The going was rough and very wet from recent rains. When well along the track, we struck trouble. One of the vehicles was not engaging four-wheel drive, and as we attempted to cross the steep side slopes of Old House Creek, drama. Thankfully, the front of the vehicle did not slide over the edge, otherwise it would have rolled into the creek, never to be recovered in this wild area. We were able to stabilise the vehicle and recover it with hand winches, but it took us until the next morning. So plans were changed and we decided to camp on the edge of the beautiful Lake Rowellan, a hydroelectricity dam nestled under the gaze of Howell's Bluff and the walls of Jerusalem National Park. We discovered the lovely Old House Creek waterfall, and after climbing up to the top, there are even more cascades. It was up here that we stumbled upon what we were searching. Fossil sea creatures in the mudstone rocks and large rounded boulders inserted into the sediments. Evidence of dramatic flood and geological processes. Brachiopods, bryozoans and scallop shells were found. We needed to make sure we didn't take the wrong step.
Found some shell fossils where Rob's pointing there in the rock. I don't want to step down there because I'll fall. And then we can see a bunch of layers coming in here. Go along. And then in this bunch of rock, we've also found the same shell fossils.
It is hard to imagine these fossils being laid down gradually over millions of years. Rather, the thick layers interspersed with thin layers were likely laid down all at once, in a similar way to the layers laid down in our strata machine experiments. The fossil hunt was on, focusing mainly on the shores of the lake. Over the years, the boulders containing fossils have tumbled hundreds of metres down from the cliffs down to the lake.
Brachiopod finds. Some Martiniopsis, Phenostella, bryozoan there, Strophilosia up there, and there's his pair, that's the shell imprint. The muscles come out of.
We have found these same fossils in the same rock layers at higher elevation, many kilometres upstream, and at much lower elevations, many kilometres downstream. This distribution is what we would expect as the mountains were lifted with volcanic activity at the end of Noah's flood and the valleys were dropped. The massive erosion from this event washed into the Bass Basin offshore to the north of Tasmania. This basin is 350 kilometres long and 150 kilometres wide and is 10 kilometres deep, full of eroded sediments. Evidence of catastrophic scale erosion. It is worth showing this massive fungi we found growing on the side of a fallen tree, part of God's amazing creation. It's surprisingly hard for a fungus. Here's the crew, and I hope you've enjoyed watching.
And there we go. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you approve of the music, Craig. I thought I've had a little bit of a pirate theme to that. Oh, hang on. I've muted everyone because the video. Let's just try that again, Craig.
I was just saying, very dramatic music. Yes, very appropriate. Well done.
Oh, there you go.
So, Craig, what do you do with all these fossils?
So we've got a number of them on display. We're starting to build up a collection that's going to rival yours, John, as well.
No,
not. Give me a few years, but we're building that up, and what we're doing is, and I'll present it soon, is filling a map up of Tasmania with all the locations that we're finding sea creatures, ultimately just to show clearly that Tasmania, without a doubt, has been completely covered with water, which we believe to be the event of Noah's flood, because all of these fossils are occurring in sort of catastrophic dumpings. They quite clearly all mixed up, and they're across layers, like I tried to explain in that waterfall. It seems very unlikely that you can have the same fossils in a thick layer below, and then all those other layers couldn't be millions of years, and then more fossils above them. It's all sort of part of a sorting process similar to what we're seeing in our strata machines.
And also, Craig, from my experience, you've got those same fossils down just on the northern exits outside of Hobart. They're easy to find down there. And also, if people watch our Darwin on the Rocks, we skip around the planet following that bed in particular. That's one of the Permian beds. Permian, of course, is a word from Russia, from the town of Perm, and over there you'll find these fossils too. And in Australia, up around New South Wales, through Cessnock and things like that, you can go and you could say, put your hand on a stack of Bibles and say, I swear I've been here before. Well, you have. In many, many places you can see this bed showing up. And there's, what's his name with the video? Glenn's in the middle, in bed.
What's his name? I've been here for many years, I'll have you know, John.
No, but your face was hidden. So it is a massive bed, Craig. And did you notice how you get fine sediment, then layers, fine sediment, then multiple layers? It sort of repeats itself.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And even the secular geologists in Tasmania write that these Permian beds within Tasmania, from Hobart up to the north of the state and across, are all one part of the sort of same layer. It's quite extensive across just our state, and that's acknowledged. Yeah, but those, just point out those dolerite peaks, igneous peaks that were in the background of the lake there. I was just reading in a geology book by a guy called Keith Corbett, who is a well-known geologist in Tasmania, acknowledging that as big as these mountains are and as widespread as the dolerite is across Tasmania, that the secular geologists are acknowledging that this has been spread in a matter of weeks and across wet sediments, what's more, interestingly.
Yeah, surprisingly, for those of you who are listening who don't comprehend how that can happen, whenever igneous rocks, hot rocks, flow out onto a wet surface, you will sort of cook the wet ground underneath. It produces steam, and as the steam passes up through the rock, the hot rock, you get a particularly interesting reaction, which is diagnostic. You know, this has been sort of fever formed as the hot steam bubbles up through it. So it's very easy to tell it was laid down on water right across all these beds in Tasmania. What do you got in your hand, Craig?
Well, I just happen to have this within reach, but this is from Permian rock as well. and you can see the charcoal there. This is from a Hobart location, and you can see the charcoal that's in there. You probably won't see it on the video, but there's also bryozoan sea creatures there. So you've got land plants and sea creatures, and perhaps cooking from probably the hot processes you were just talking about.
Yeah, that's right. Well, how do folks get involved? We must have a few Tasmanian watching, even though it's sort of still dim, dark and cold down there. If folks want to get involved in what you're doing in some of these rough, tough field trip sort of activities, how do they get in touch with you, Craig?
Well, they can just email me. The best email is probably taz@creationdiscoverycentre.com.
Want to repeat that?
Just Taz, as in Tasmania, TAS, at creationdiscoverycentre.com.
And so for those English people who were telling me the other day, they're coming to Australia now, they're free to travel, and they want to go to Tasmania. If you're watching this morning, because I'll tell you as well, then that's how you can get involved in a good, rough, tough Aussie fun time. Just talk to Craig when you get down there, but go and see his museum. And your museum is where, Craig?
So we're in Beauty Point in the north of Tasmania, not far from Launceston.
And Glenn's museum is at IGA this week, BCC the next week. It's in every supermarket coming up soon, isn't it, Glenn? Yeah. Okay, well, listen, I'd better take my section of the ministry report before we move on to the topic. What have I been doing? Well, I've had several very busy days in our museum. No, not Jurassic Ark. That's been open now for years. And we are really thrilled to finally be getting people coming back now that all the COVID stuff is gone, and they are increasingly regular. And we're very grateful for that, because for 3 years we have struggled. Parks cost the same amount to run, whether there's people in them or not. So we're very grateful to those of you who come. Tell your friends, come on up and see us at Jurassic Ark. Go to creationresearch.net. Those of you Aussies who are watching at this time of morning, and find out where it is outside of Gympie, our gold mining town, and come up and have a wonderful day. But we've opened up a second museum. Craig's got a Creation Discovery Centre in Tasmania. Joseph's got the main museum in England there at Oswestry. And we've now got another Creation Discovery Centre here in Brisbane, out near the Archerfield Airport. And we already had one supporters meeting come along and see what's been achieved, see what can be achieved. And the last 2 days I've spent helping a builder, really watching him while he pulled things off and put things back on as we extend the display pace in room number 2. So next job is to get that all painted, and I talked to our artist yesterday about putting up some informational ones. Perhaps, Craig, we'll steal your Bible display concept. That was pretty good, mate. So get ready to share your ideas there, because we want to move into that place by the middle of June. That's our next aim, to have an open day there. And we are taking our bigger fossils over. We've got the small sort of one person can hold it fossil at the moment, but we're starting to move the bigger ones over beginning next week, so that by middle June we can have a come along and see what really is possible. You see, yesterday I spent several hours with the manager of the building, and we were planning on stage 2. We were sitting there comparing architects' drawings and how much room we need and where the windows should be and all those sort of things. So those of you in Oz, pray much for this. For those of you in America, you can support this through Creation Education Society. It's tax deductible. Have a look at the ways you can help the ministry in England and in Tasmania and in Australia, because yes, we love you to be involved, we love you to benefit, and we love you to take part in helping the costs of all of those things. I guess you can say the next thing we will be doing is borrowing Glenn's ideas. Did you like that pool out there? Because Karen, who organises our rocks, she thought that's a great idea. She works a lot with kids in schools and that, and she said, well, we're going to have one of those. Kids and water really go well together. Mum and Dad often don't think that, but muddy water's even better. And throw in a dog or two, and they'll all have wonderful time looking for fossils. And yes, Glenn, we might even borrow some of your shark's teeth, but no need to. I've got thousands of the shark's teeth because
you did
for a long time. So that's a great idea. That mobile stream, shark tooth finding, and things like that. And we'll let you know how it goes. But out here, if you want something to pray for our next main opening on in the middle of June, and you can keep up that. Diane, we'll be putting that in the newsletter, the evidence newsletter.
Yes, we will.
And how do they get that again if they want to get onto Creation Research newsletters?
If you go to our main website, so that's creationresearch.net, and then there is a page there signing up where you can sign up for a newsletter, and they are free.
Sam, have you got any updates on videos and things like that are happening there?
I could do a brief update with me. So I've been doing... Hang on, let me put myself full screen. That's probably a good idea. There we go. So I have been doing the Bible Journey Challenge. If you don't know what the Bible Journey Challenge is, it's where we read the Bible from the very start to the very end without no jumping around or fiddling around and things like that. So I've got my Bible here. I'm making my way through it. I'm currently in Joshua, nearing the end. So we've got the next section ready for you guys who are following along. I do apologize about the delay. It's been a bit busy with me, unfortunately. I have been very, very vigorously carrying on reading every day, but I will pull that up now. So again, for those who don't know, you can take the Bible Journey Challenge. You can start at any time. It doesn't matter. We just read through the Bible in a year from start to finish. And this is the next section to do. This is Numbers 34 to 1 Samuel 12. I'm that amazing. I have 2 books named after me in the Bible. Look at that. But anyway, but yeah, so that's the latest update from me. I'm really enjoying it. I'm so glad I'm through past all of the first 4 books of the Bible. I mean, Genesis was good, but the rest were very dry. But it's fine. We're into the good stuff now. So look out for another update next week.
That's good.
That's brutally honest, Sam.
I didn't really enjoy them. What can I say? But anyway, it's fine. It's fine. It's the first time I'm doing this, so you can cut me a little bit of slack.
That's good. All right, perhaps I'd better give the first segment here of Clam. Do we have any thank yous or anything we better do before I start on my section?
What a wonderful idea, John. Let's do that then. Right, okay, so let's go through our little bit of thank yous. And do you want to take a question as well, or just do thank yous?
No, we'll just take thank yous at the moment.
All right, thank you. So we've got Doki Doki coming in with 2 US buckaroos. A pixelated hippo chomps on a 1-up. There you go. That's a gaming reference for any. It's a gaming reference, Diane. You probably won't get it. so 1-up is basically an extra life in a video game. So there you go. That's the simplest explanation I can come up with. And Alec Cox comes in with 5 US buckaroos. God bless this ministry. The things secular schools are allowed to teach as truth to our children is just deplorable. Thanks for share what's observed. You're very welcome, Alec. Genuinely, we can't do this without you guys because your support genuinely keeps this ministry ticking. We can't do it without it. So if you do feel so inclined, please feel free to donate. You can donate either via super chats and super stickers, or you can donate directly to Creation Research at creationresearch.net. Oh, Doki Doki, look at that. There you go. Super sticker, 3 US buckaroos. A character holding their head in their hand saying, "How is it going?" I'm assuming that's sort of like that. We can't see it. This is the miracle of these descriptions, which also makes it slightly better for our podcast listeners. But also as a reminder as well, whilst I'm on that subject, you can actually get your daily dose of creation conversations from your local sort of podcast supplier. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. I know we haven't really done a plug for this in a while, but there you go. So you can just search Creation Conversations. You can find us there. So there we go. And I'll take that off the screen as well. But that is it in terms of thank yous. And George has made this very good point here. Sam, you can also listen to the Bible when you drive on an SD card. You can indeed. I have the Bible app on my phone, and I listen to that when I'm going around doing my shopping to get my daily dose in. The audio Bible is allowed in the challenge. But yeah, so we'll leave it there. John, over to you.
Good, thank you. Okay, now, as Joe and I talked about what we were going to do, he said it'd be really good if we went back through Genesis, but did Genesis geology. Now, because the Lord has given us 6,000 or so years since he created it, there's an awful lot to cover. I mean, even reading the whole Bible, Sam's telling you how long it takes to do that. And we're only going to do maybe 10 chapters of Genesis at the very best as we try to look through this. But because we're going to be using words like rocks and stones, we need, first of all, to get you to think. Now, which one of those is a rock and which one is a stone? You've heard the saying between a rock and a hard place? Well, in reality, most people would go to the driveway and pick this up. Now, I still remember using the same illustration with a field trip on a youth camp in the UK, United Kingdom. And when I told them we were going to go on a field trip, they were really excited, get outside, beat some rocks up and things like that. But I first of all said, stop, lean down, we're on a driveway, and pick up a rock. And they leant down and they didn't know what to pick up. Now, would you pick up a rock or a stone, or is it the other way around? What's a rock and what's a stone? Well, the funny thing was, when I got the kids to pick up a rock, well, they weren't sure if it was a rock. Perhaps it was a stone. Or did you know they both are words that mean exactly the same? The word rock, the word stone, simply refer to something hard. In England, we have a real historic look at where the word comes from. As those wretched Roman invaders went along the southern side of the Thames, they were looking for a hard place to cross because, I mean, that's a solid place where the wheels of their chariots, etc., wouldn't sink, where the soldiers wouldn't slither in the mud. There was no London Bridge. It hadn't even fallen down. It wasn't even built. And so they were going along looking for a place to cross, and they finally found a place with enough hard bits. I'll put that in Roman, put it in Old Latin, and you're talking about stones, the word that simply means something hard. Stone, stain, stein, steen, they're all variations of exactly the same old word that simply means hard. Now, when you find a piece of white rock like this, yes, white rock, white stone, we give it a special name called quartz. And quartz is a combination of meanings that come from places like Czechoslovakia and that. It means very hard. Ah, interesting. Very hard, hard. In fact, there's the first clue that as we began to not only name these, because when God made the world, somebody raise a question? When God made the world, he not only created the rocks and stones that we would learn to walk across, but he gave Adam a job, and that was to name things. Now, we named the animals for a start, but in the end, we've had to invent names to describe the reality we're living in. This is hard, that's very hard. So implicit in that is the fact that you can test these. When I scratch one on the other, I find that this white rock, which is the commonest hard rock, actually will scratch most of the other rocks around it, unless you're in a diamond mine, because diamond is the naturally hardest rock you'll find out there. It'll scratch everything. But basically, if you arrange all of these hard things in an order of hardness, you'll finally get down to things like this. See that nice orange rock that we have here? Now, this is so soft, I can actually mark it with this, and you'll find it powders off. In fact, this rock is found only about 20 kilometres from my house, from an old Aboriginal mine where they dug up the yellow and red ochre, which they use for making face paints. Now, don't you ladies out there laugh, because we mix that sort of thing with clay and sell it to you as face powder, and with crushed granite and feldspar and all those sort of things. Not much different, just more fancy sophistication. So implicit in the names of these rocks, from hard to very hard, to so soft you can write with it, we had an implicit hardness scale. Now, you think carefully. When we invent names for things, it's one of the best evidences we were made in the image of God, who actually named man. Adam's name didn't come from himself. Or Eve was named by Adam, and Adam named, well, did he call it a giraffe, a kangaroo, a wallaby? What names did he invent for the animals? We're not quite sure. But many of the names we currently use for the rocks and the fossils are so ancient they've been lost in antiquity. But rock and stone, hard thing, hard place. So if you go to England today, you'll find just across the river from where the Romans crossed is a little town called Staines. Staines, Steen, Stein, Stone. They're all the same old word. So as we talk about the origin of all these things, put it in a biblical perspective, there's no doubt about it, whether it was me or Joe or any other Christian who believes God's word, your starting point is God made us in his image. We can name things because not only did God give us speech, but he gave us a memory which can diagnose the characteristics of the rock and come up with a word to describe it. Hard, very hard. We made these names up. So for those of you thinking, oh, I've never studied geology, I've never found a fossil in my life, I don't own a four-wheel drive, I'm jealous of Craig running out there in the bush and all of that. No, you don't need any of those. You need the abilities that God has given you, common sense being the first one. In fact, let me go one step further. I've got two rocks here, and they're related. They're different from the first three rocks. In fact, I'll hold this one up for you. Can you see that black rock with holes in it? Now, how about this one here? Can you see the nice piece of gold? Yep. You see, this has got gold in it, and that's got holes in it. Now, what's the connection between these two? Well, this black one, and sometimes you find it with holes, sometimes without holes, and this rock with a piece of gold that's in it, they're related, because this black rock gets its name basalt from its connection to this gold rock. The gold one, by the way, is mentioned in the Bible. In Genesis chapter 2, it tells you that there was an Eden created. In Genesis chapter 2 and 3, it talks about there being very good gold there. Now, the word gold, yeah, we've had it around for a long time. In every language, you'll find that the word for gold actually means yellow. Gold, if you go to Indo-European languages, you could say the word is gyel, Gyell, from which ultimately we get yellow, or glass, or glisten. Many of these ancient words that have been around a long time have a basic meaning. It's got nothing to do with how heavy this is. It's got nothing to do with anything more than, hey, look, there's a yellow rock and there's a black rock. And it soon became evident to people, because they were using the abilities that God gave them, they could give names to these based on what they did. You ever bought cheap gold? Or not good gold. Good gold is 24 carat. But you know, you can buy 18 carat, 20 carat, 9 carat. In fact, by the time you get lesser than that, it's starting to look very silver, because the more silver you have in the gold, the less gold it's. Well, remember we streaked one of those rocks on the other one? This rock here gets its name from the fact that when you actually scratch the surface with a piece of gold, it shows up bright yellow. So this one became known as the scratch stone, the color stone, the one that would show up gold. Old word, basalt. So basalt has nothing to do with any knowledge of technical volcanoes or anything like that, even though this comes out of volcanoes. Oh, by the way, built into that is probably a clue about when that rock formed. You're going to think biblically, were there any volcanoes on day one? How about earthquakes? Did we have earthquakes on day 2 or day 3? You see, we're going to challenge you to think through the biblical picture. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void. There was nothing put on the earth that God didn't make at the start, including gold. You see, gold is one of our elements. Gold is one of the natural native things that just is. And there was good gold on the land where the river came out into Avila. That's where the gold was. So whoever compiled that record, or was it God? or was it Moses writing in retrospect? And one thing we know about Genesis is the first 6 days up until the creation of Adam, no man could have written, no man could have guessed at. That has to be the first book of Revelation because nobody was there, not even Moses, not even Adam. So when you read about there being good gold just outside the Garden of Eden, it was not something that man could have written as a prophecy or anything like that. So gold means yellow. Basalt means the stone you scratch or the stone you touch in order to see if it's good gold. Good gold will give you a bright streak. If you look at poor gold, it'll give you a silver to a white streak. Very practical. God made the world so we could use it. But when was the first earthquake? When was the first volcanoes? You see, when the fountains of the deep burst open at Noah's flood, what was that? Was it a volcano? Because today most volcanoes have lots of water. When God made the gold, how did he do it? Did he just speak and gold appeared? Because it's certainly there on the surface on the day after Adam and Eve have sinned. It's there. So it must have been there before that. So when you look at the construction of Genesis, how do you fit this together? So don't be surprised. I'm going to run some tests for you. In fact, Glenn, this is your little bit coming up after I show one of these bits. You see, here's a piece of pegmatite. You can see it's got feldspar, the pink stuff. It's got micas in it, and it's got large crystals. Now, in this particular row of pegmatite, you might find it funny, but I remember going through the tin mine that we used to have one of the universities ran, and you could follow this pegmatite dike, which they thought was associated with millions of years of slow cooling, etc. But as I followed it along, you could follow this pegmatite with coarse grains, and 200 meters further on, it was tiny grains. In fact, that's a clue where the name comes from, because the one with tiny grains is called granite, or it used to be grainy it, or ITE. Granite, ITE, simply means something, a thing. It's old Latin for simply a thing. You find similar concepts in Greek in that. So remember, when you're dealing with geology, we invented these words. And the invention of these words is one of the best evidences we were made in God's image. Because I'll be honest, I don't see monkeys going around saying, shark's teeth, fossil. No, they don't have speech at all, because we were made in the image of God and they weren't. Now, is that your starting point if you want a biblical view of geology? In fact, it was Nicholas Steno's starting point when he started to look at some of these rocks. It was Johann Volker's. Whoops, I think I just pressed the wrong button there.
You're good.
How do I get out of here, Sam? There we are, back again. All right, it was Johann Volker's starting point in 1771 when he looked at some of these creatures. I mean, there's one. Yes, I put those white streaks in there so that everybody who sees it can see that the thing is sort of turned around. Mm-hmm. It's got big eyeballs. You see, I didn't bother doing it on the bottom because I really show people that bit. But I scratched the, that's a real one, by the way, not a cast. It's very, very heavy. And here's one that's sort of partially curved. Can you see it there as I hold it up? And that's a trilobite. In fact, in 1771, that word came into existence before we even knew what those fossils would do. How did they get their name? Well, 1, 2, 3. Tri. These are lobes, and it goes through the other direction too. 1, 2, 3. So when you find Johannes Walt inventing that word in 1771, he didn't have a clue whether this was animal, vegetable. He's pretty sure it wasn't just minerals. He thought it was something living because it looked like a creature of some sort, but he didn't know what it was. So he just described it, 3-lobed thing, trilobite. You see, we do that because we're made in the image of God. We can speak, we can create words. I mean, isn't that what characterizes journalism? We sometimes have to invent words that have never existed before. But don't be surprised, when God created Adam, Adam was made with a complete dictionary and the ability to create words. So creative journalism, yes, you can create words, and sadly, you can create lies too. a bad use of what we've been given. But it's not far from fiction, is it? It passes from fiction to somebody saying this must be true. So you can say this is a trilobite, good descriptive word. You can eventually figure out when you cut through that all through here, and this is how they did it. They cut through hundreds of them, and these rolled up ones, the guts are still in there. The nervous system is still in there. You can unroll the thing virtually in your head by cutting it through, and you'll find the legs are still in there. So this turned out to be an arthropodos, the jointed leg creatures like the crabs and marine bugs that we see so often. So poor old Johannes Volk didn't know what it was, but he gave it a description term. And then we later on figured that this one here, that's just folding down its back. You can see it there. Yes, you can now. It was starting to roll up, and this one has rolled up. And in our world today, we find quite a few creatures. The roly-polies, for example, are good evidence of creatures who are rolling up in defense. What's wrong? What are they defending themselves against? Something in trouble. Something's happening in the sediment. Something's blowing onto them too fast, so they roll up, and that's a protective mode. Actually, that means if you want to do creation geology, you can start as with the present, as long as you include what was given to you by revelation in the past. Did you catch how I said that? The biblical geology actually gives you the clue as to how to deal with the present. If you have creatures today that roll up when they're frightened, then God made creatures to produce their own kind. There's your link. If the present is the key to the past, if that's all you've got, you haven't got any idea, if you believe in evolution, what these creatures would or wouldn't have done. So what you're doing is starting with God's revealed principles, and that's how we got paleontology to work. I mean, are you ready there, Glenn Nelly? I'm going to bring you on soon. There's a fossil shark's tooth. Nice. And when we found fossil shark's teeth along the Mediterranean, you might be surprised people didn't think they were shark's teeth. They regard them as tongue stones. They poke out of your tongue. There were daddy tongue stones, mummy tongue stones, and baby tongue stones. And this is the ancient idea that the fossils were formed by the gods in the rocks to deceive us. Now, do you realize if you want to do geology, you first of all have to have 3 beliefs? I debated the professor of geology at Oxford. Yes, not the one in Mississippi, sorry, Glenn, but the real one back there in England that's been a school for nearly 1,000 years. And he was shocked when I said, he accused me of being religious. I said, listen, you're going to accuse me of being religious. You are equally religious. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I said, you've got to believe 3 things at least before you can even start doing geology. What have I got to believe? I only believe the facts. I said, no, you believe the world is real. That's why geology has never got ahead in India, because they've sat on the ground going, shutting their eyes and wanting to get to reality. They don't think the world around them is real. You have to believe that what you see is actually there. Now, you're going to find a lot of people in the West are more and more wanting to run away from what's actually there and solve the world's problems in abstract. And firstly, you have to believe that what you see is not only actually there, you can ask a rational question about it and get a rational answer. So when Nicholas Steno came along, you see, here's the other option. It looks like a shark's teeth because it is a shark's teeth. In other words, what you see is real. What you see is what you get. And don't be surprised that the Bible says that we are made in the image of God. He's real. He's self-real. We are created real, but we're made in his image. And if he can think, we can think. If he can declare words and names, I'll call him Adam. He'll call Eve, he'll give his wife a name Eve. And then he'll name all the animals as well. What you'll find is that we have a reality because God is the basis of that reality. So Nicholas Steno, surprise, surprise, a follower of the Reformation, a follower of Martin Luther, who actually believed that God made the world and God stamped his nature on the world. Do you believe that? Because if you don't, you've got no way of forming a creation view of geology. So Nicholas Steno believed God was real. Nicholas Steno believed Martin Luther's favorite book, Romans 1:20, God has stamped his nature on creation. Therefore, because God is real and he's made creatures to produce their own kind, you will actually be able to really see that. In fact, that's got to be a shark's teeth, because sharks still have teeth like that. Or they may have been much bigger once in the past, but Nicholas Steno actually solved the problem and then went on one step further. He started to ask, if we now know that these are fossil sharks, how did they get there? In fact, can we cut to Glenn, because he should have a few shark's teeth by now from his collection that he's been letting the kids play around in puddles. Tell us where you got yours from again, Glenn.
Got them from creeks in North Mississippi. And you showed a really big shark teeth. My favorite are these little shark teeth. We find them. This is one of the bigger of the small ones. They get way smaller than this, which makes it great for making jewelry with these little shark teeth. But this came from a sand shark. And the interesting thing about the shark teeth, when we find them, we find all types of bones, and not just teeth, but bones from terrestrial animals mixed in with aquatic animals.
So when you find this mixture, Glenn, there's a clue about how it could have got there, because domestic deer and that don't actually live with sharks. If they do, they don't last very long, correct?
That's
So
right.
something's had to mix that together. And because God told you to love him with your mind, you are free to think, how could I explain this mix? Will I start with Noah's flood? Will I start after the flood? Will I start with local floods? What will I do? Okay, so what we're encouraging you to do is not only come to our next display in the middle of June. I got bags of these things. You see, we have big collection places. I take homeschoolers and public trips up to some of the shark teeth beds, and they have a wonderful day because the rocks are rotting and then the shark's teeth fall out. We don't really even have to work in the puddles to collect them. Yes, you can find them in the streams, but there's so many showing up in the sand and along the creek beds that we've ended up with thousands of these things. But the kids automatically say that's some kind of shark. Just like Nicholas Steno, he started with the biblical philosophy. So challenge, are you watchers going to decide that's how we're going to do it? Principle number one, God is. Principle number two, God can be trusted. Principle number three, he stamped his nature on creation. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. So if it looks like a shark's teeth, it's probably a shark's tooth. Let me take you to a very old rock. I say very old in my collection because my wife and my children have often accused me of being someone who never throws anything away. And there certainly is a bit of a truth to that. You see, I'm a hoarder of fossils. So when Glenn says, we've got a lot of John's fossils over in the USA, yes, I've been collecting there for 40 years. When Joseph says, you got all of John's fossils, yes, I've been collecting there for 40 years. But what's unique about this one, this is the first fossil I ever found in the United Kingdom. I think it must have been back in 1987. I'm following one of the old geology guides, and it said as you go up this railway cutting that was on the way to one of the coal mines, you will see a band, and it's sitting just in association with a coal bed. And they said, yep, no, I didn't find this myself. I just followed the geological guide, and sure enough, they were absolutely right. Falling out onto the railway line edge was this rock. Oh, I recognize the fossils in it. You see the black bits, the little shell-like creatures? If you come to Australia today and you grew up where I grew up, you'll find those down on the beach. They wash out from the mud. If you like fishing, you'll go and you'll dig them up because lingulas make great bait. Now, they're brachiopods. In fact, they're one of the few brachiopods still alive. So, Craig, make a careful note when you're collecting some more down in the hills of Tasmania. There are hundreds of varieties of brachiopods in the rocks. There's precious few in the world today. It seems they've been on a downward cycle for quite a long time. But this is a brachiopod, and the fish love it. It actually anchors in the ground with a big hold on coming out of the shell, and it is upright. Did you hear that? You see, if you're doing creation geology, you not only want to have a principle that helps you identify things, if that looks like a lingular shell, it probably is a lingular shell. But did you catch how I said they live? Because I've dug them up for bait. You get them, you hook them onto your hook on the fishing line, and you actually throw it out, and the fish love them too. That's why they're just below the surface of the mud. The fish have trouble finding them, and they will use their little siphon to pump water through and extract food from, etc. But you notice something? Here in England, you have Australian fossil shells. Yes, they live in Australia. Haven't caught too many up there around England yet. There may be a few places where they live, but I'm not sure about that. But the one thing I know is these weren't buried where they live. Why? Because lingular shells live vertically. And the ones in the fossil layers alongside that coal seam in that old railway cutting in the guide from way, way, way back actually has them all horizontal. And in fact, it's such a well-known bed, we call it a marker bed. Now, question, how would you end up with gazillions of fossil shells that today are only found markedly in Australia and around the Pacific, and yet they're not in buried position? Their buried position would mean they should be vertical. They're actually in a horizontal position. And the same is true. Joseph just recently came back from his trip down the Bristol Channel with a beautiful big pecten shell. Now, the pecten shell was buried in the rocks. Now, pectens hop along. Have you ever seen them? They're the first jet-powered machine we've ever seen across. It pumps water out and it jumps right across the surface. And they can actually dig their way out of the mud really quickly. So if you find a pecten shell and it's closed and it's enclosed in the rock, there's several things you know about it. Pectens today can dig their way out. Yes, we've run the tests. I mean, sometimes scientists have to be a little bit cruel to actually find this out. But if you get a pecten shell, you have it in the mud layer and it's standing upright, doing its thing and collecting food while it stands there, not hopping around the surface. If you actually start flooding it, then here's what will happen. The pecten is used to this and it'll start climbing out. I mean, the tides wash in, the tides wash out, they get covered with mud, uncovered. Pectens have to be able to move fairly quickly. But you know how far they can move? 1 meter, 2 meters, 3 meters, 3 and a bit meters. If they get covered with more than 3 and a bit meters of mud, they will not make it out of that rock. So if you find them standing upright in the rock, then they were buried by a layer that came in, well, it came in 3.5 meters deep at least in one go. So when you look at creation geology, you can find exactly how, I mean, you're looking at the present world. The present is the key to the past. No, the past is the key to the present. Charles Lyell and Charles Darwin, really, they were saying, don't take God's word into consideration. Challenge to all of you folks out there. If you want to make a creation geology, then you'll have to start with what God says and get familiar with it. So when were the first earthquakes? Were they on day 2 when the land was lifted up? In fact, isn't there a verse that says, in the last days there will come an earthquake which is greater than any since the foundation of the world? So the Bible gives you a clue. On day 3, when the land was lifted up, you would not have wanted to be there. But would there have been any rocks formed? Would there have been any strata formed? You see, we're going to let you have a little chance to ask some questions now on Glenn's stuff, on my stuff, on Craig's stuff. You want to join his free 4-wheel drive club, etc., or Diane's reports, all these sort of things. Can I encourage you, get your questions in now. Sam, time to say thank you and time for you to raise some questions off the side at the moment.
All right then. Okay, so let's do some thank yous and some questions. Our first thank you comes into IMAX, sent a super sticker for 4 US buckaroos, a pair character exaggeratingly stretching his arm forward to offer a cup of coffee. Thank you so much indeed for the coffee. We've also got Neil Grindley coming in with 10 British buckaroos. Thank you, Neil. And also our good friend George Bond, super chat with 10 Aussie buckaroos. What happens when you bash evolutionary ancestors with a hammer? You get crushed rock. There you go. So a nice little joke from George there. Right. Okay. So let's do a question here. There we go. George asked that question, so I'll give George one. Question: what is wrong with the secular explanation for the origin of water on Earth?
Well, I'm going to say something, then I want Diane to take that one up. Crushed rock. I must admit, George, you have some jokes, but I'm not sure whether that rates as one or not. But thank you for your comments. Diane, you got any thoughts on the origin of water there? Because I know you're preparing the next evidence news for sending out, which deals a bit with that.
Yes, this is a debate that's been going on because the standard theory about how the Earth formed by the evolutionists is that it was formed by a whole lot of small particles that crushed into one another called planetesimals, and they eventually got all stuck together and formed a great big rocky mass. But in that process, the Earth would have been very, very hot, and so it ended up being basically a hot molten blob. Now, that is a problem if you want to cover the planet with water. But as everyone knows, the Earth is covered with water. About 70% of the surface of the Earth is water. So it's always been a mystery to the evolutionists who believe this theory as to where the Earth's water came from. And in the recent scientific literature, there's been a few suggestions for this, but the current most common one is that it was delivered to the Earth by asteroids. And so people have been studying asteroids, and we're writing about that in the newsletter next week. You'll see a bit more detail to see whether they have water in them. And some asteroids have water in them and some of them don't. The problem is, how do you get that much water to cover the Earth? Now, that is not a problem if you believe what the Bible says, because the Bible says that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the next sentence, it says the Spirit of God was hovering over the water. So there was water there. The earth was created with water. In fact, there's always been enough water to completely cover the earth, because that's another question we get. Where did all the water from Noah's flood come from? Well, it was already there. So this is a good illustration of how, if you start with what it says in the Bible compared with the theories of human beings, you end up with two different ideas. We don't have any problem explaining where the earth's water came from. The evolutionists who want to have the Earth starting out as a hot molten blob formed by a whole lot of things all crashing into one another do have a problem, and they can't solve it. And that's because they're starting from the wrong point of view. And this is where we try in our newsletter to we take what people have actually found. The findings are real, right? There is water in some asteroids, but that doesn't mean that those were the source of Earth's water. It just means that they're made out of the same stuff as there is on the Earth. Well, that's not a surprise. The Lord made the whole of the universe as well. So that's what we try to do with the newsletter. Is look at the actual scientific discoveries. They're real, what they discovered, and then sort out what is the story they're telling about this. Does it make sense? What is a better explanation for it? So if we can come back to us, if any of the others have got something to add about Earth's water.
Well, I was just thinking what Second Peter says.
Sorry, that?
I was just thinking about what Second Peter chapter 3 says,
Yes.
that the earth was formed out of water and by water.
Yes.
Yes. So
In
it's
fact,
reinforced in the New
yes.
Testament as well as what it says in the beginning. Yes.
In fact, to give a geology perspective on here, if you, as I said to the Professor of Oxford, you have to have certain beliefs, which he rampantly didn't think he even had. He had to believe he could think. He had to believe he could make up a framework. Now, he was used to calling this theorizing or rationalizing, but in reality, he was starting with nothing and making something in his head. Now, he believed the asteroids brought the water in. He never saw it. He's never seen it, right? All he knows is asteroids have water. Now, in the biblical perspective, you certainly have to admit to a faith start. In the beginning, God created. You weren't there. I wasn't there. So you either believe that or you reject it. But if you reject it, then your only other option to believe in yourself as if you were God. So that's the only two options. So please don't tell me one's a faith position and one isn't. They are both faith positions. But if you go one step further, if you are genuine looking to construct a creation geology, you will have to start with the earth being covered by water. There was nothing alive on it. There was no daily sort of tides that you would have recognized. I'm sure they would have been there, but in reality, there's nothing in their road to make beaches or anything. There's no animals to be fossilized. So your starting point is a planet that's covered with water. That's what Genesis says. And are you willing to actually make that your starting point? Because it tells you the Big Bang is rubbish. It tells you that the world was cool. It tells you the world wasn't too hot. It wasn't too cold. So when it says the earth was without form and void, that's what it means. It didn't have any shape. So the outside of the water, sorry, it's not a nice round blue blob, which people try to paint in kids' books. That's where it will have ended, but it had no shape. It was unformed. There was nothing filling it. So challenge point, are you willing to start there? Because that's where we'll continue on. What other questions, Sam?
All right, let's grab another question from the chat. Here we go. Doki Doki has come in with 99 US centaroos with smiling face with sunglasses. Thank you, Doki. And as a result, he gets a question answered. Question: the Cambrian explosion apparently lasted 30 million years. Is this a good enough rescue device for the explosion?
How many explosions last 30 million years?
I'll be honest, everywhere I've been to see the Cambrian explosion, you will find that there was no evidence of an explosion. Basically, what they're talking about is one moment there's no animals, next moment there is, right? And they're looking at the fossil record. Now, the fossils are all dead. So there's no explosion of life. There's obviously a rapid burial of life that's already there. So the Cambrian explosion concept has got it backwards. You may want to say that's the first record of mass death. That's probably the best way of looking at it. So it's the opposite of the explosion. It's some sort of catastrophe. I've looked at the Cambrian, pre-Cambrian boundary, Grand Canyon, right up in Canada, right across to England, right through Germany and Romania. I've been to check this out in New Zealand. It's incredible what you can actually get to see at these boundaries, and they are better defined as points of demise rather than points of origin.
Anyone else?
Well, when you look at the Cambrian animals, a lot of them are extinct, but they are obviously fully formed functioning animals. So the explosion idea comes from, well, they just appear without any obvious link to other animals or to sort of pre-life type structures. They're just there. So that they are fully formed functional animals. Now, some of them are still here, but very few of them aren't. But they're still very complex. And as John mentioned, with the trilobites and with other fossil animals that are considered to be even older than those, we now have the ability to scan these and see all of their internal structures, and some of them are quite complex. So the more that we look at the so-called primitive animals in the Cambrian, the more complexity we see. There's no such thing as a simple animal. They're all complex. Some of them are bigger than others, but they're all complex, right from whenever we find them in the fossil record. If anyone wants to add to that.
Well, perhaps just one thing, Diane. When you're looking at your geologic column, don't forget it's a construct. If you go out there to try and look at it and walk up and down the geologic column, you'll be unbelievably disappointed. As Joseph shares from his student undergraduate days, he was doing a geological trip with one of the professionals, and he asked about the geologic column. And the professor said, well, basically, it's hard to find anywhere in a complete sort of structure. You find this bit here and this bit there, etc. So you'll find it's actually up there in your head more than anywhere. And if you are still looking for evidence of that, one of the other geologists who I had much admiration for before he passed on was Derek Ager, and that's exactly the point he makes. So when we deal with the Cambrian explosion, it's only a Cambrian explosion because geology largely started in England and Wales. And that's what they noticed down at the bottom. You all of a sudden have heaps of fossils. And that was in Cimbria, hence the word Cambridge. I'm pretty sure that if you started geology in Australia or in China, you'd end up with a totally different geologic column. And of course, that was based on Lyell and many of the others who had pagan, anti-Christian ideas. Yes, you find fossil trilobites at that point, but that's because they're dead. That's because they were rapidly buried. If they were buried slowly, they wouldn't be there. So again, it's the opposite of an explosion. You bring your system to Australia, sooner or later, you find there are fossils before that line of the trilobites. So what do you call it? Precambrian. Ediacaran, a crossover, etc. So you have to extend your column in two directions, which should tell you this is a theory that's not working. Okay, last chance for any comments on this, and one more question, Sam.
Just as you mentioned, a construct, is it a evidence of the geologic column in the fossil record? Is it a construct of an explosion of life, or is it of the timing of the death and deposition? And from a hydrology physics perspective, I look at it and see, well, this is evidence of the death and deposition, not an explosion of life. So it's a mindset as to what you're observing.
Yeah, I've got to agree with that, Glenn, after all these years of tripsing up and down mountains and across valleys and things like that.
All right, well, let's do one more question. This one comes in from Shogiwa. Good to see you, Shogi. Question. Randall Carson claims there is a layer of ash and the fossils found below this ash layer are from extinct creatures and that the fossils found above the ash layer are living fossils. Is this true?
Okay, the best example I can give you, if you go to New Zealand, you'll find that this so-called Cretaceous boundary, K boundary, potassium argon boundary, whatever you want to call it, this simply looks good on paper. So you'll find above that layer, you recognize many of the fossils. Below that layer, you may not recognize many of the fossils, but you still recognize some. But then you come with me to Montana, and I can take you exactly to where that ash boundary is, and you have to raise the same issues that even Derek Ager raised, right? He said, what you find is this type of ash, if you make it meteorite or volcanic or whatever, is such a fine ash deposit, it wouldn't settle down and kill off the creatures below it. It would only settle down once the creatures are dead. So in Montana, don't be surprised, at the boundary of that KT boundary, you will find Triceratops, the marker animal for the end of the Cretaceous there, is not only below it, it's actually above it as well. So it doesn't work as a concept. And you will find that layer, you can find it here in Australia, you find it in New Zealand, easy to find over there, particularly on the South Island. You'll find that's a quite known well layer, but it is not universal. And as Derek Ager said, you have to think of it in reverse. You would only get that fine ash layer, whether you make it volcanic, whether you make it meteoric, after all the animals are dead and lying there waiting to be gently buried, because if they were moving, the ash would never settle down. So I basically call it a false construct. But the one thing it doesn't do, it doesn't provide any evidence of evolution. It doesn't provide any evidence that contradicts Noah's flood at all. Catastrophic ash, if you make it meteoric or whatever, volcanic ash, you make it catastrophic, then you have nothing contradicting Noah's flood at all. Let's move on with my little bit before we come to the last part of the day. I have an unusual fossil. I say fossil because I dug it out of the rocks. We're in central Queensland. There were lots of fossil trees in this layer, and you'll see this one here. Oh, it's beautifully round, and it's got a lovely flat layer. But what I found interesting, as soon as I dug it out, it's sort of near the Triassic boundary out there, and I could hold it in this hand, right hand, but it didn't fit my left hand. You know, the interesting thing when we look for evidence of fossil people, 8 times out of 10, you find more evidence in artifacts than you ever find of skulls and bones. Oh, yes, I know they want to make Lucy and all these things human, but you are far better looking for evidence of grinders. You see, this has been ground up on one side and has also beautifully been pounded at the other, but you can actually hold it. 99% or a little bit less of all the fossil tools that I found, because this is a tool, it's got a function. It would never erode like that in a stream. It would never be shaped like that, and it would never be right-handed. Holding it in your left hand, you'd have real trouble trying to use that. It would give you a broken wrist by and large. And you'll find that the percentage of people who've got left versus right hand is matched in the tools. So you're looking for evidence of fossil people, then actually look for the evidence of their tools, whether it be the throwing stone axes from the northern Sahara or up into France, whether it be the pounders or the stone axes, or even that scraper I showed you used for opening oyster shells on the Barrier Reef where I found it. You will find it's a right-handed scraper, not a left-handed one. So when you're looking for the evidence of people, don't just restrict yourself to bones or skeletons. Also look for their tools. Now, yes, I've seen skulls out there in the real world. Were they buried? And were they buried quickly? Was it a cemetery? Was it a fossil of Noah's flood? How will you decide? You'll only be able to decide if you take the principles that God has given you. A, the world was created covered with water. B, there were no humans there. C, man didn't start making tools till the sixth day. Actually, probably make that a bit later, because Cain killed his brother Abel, most likely with a stone that he either shaped or found that would do the job for him. And thereafter, we actually use our creative ability to take stones that won't shape themselves and we shape them into a new creation. Yes, you heard the right word. Creation is the start of the Bible, but God made things in two ways. One by direct fiat, he spoke and it was. The secondly, he took dust and he made man. So he took something he already had brought into existence and he reprocessed it. He reprogrammed it. That's what we've done with this. So when you're looking for the evidence of human existence, look for somebody, look for something that would not happen by itself. Look for a creation. But there's another few clues as well. I've used this many times because I found it. You see my nice fossil thorn? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, rather nasty thorns, aren't they? And I found that layer just below the layer that this came from. You see our nice fossil dinosaur footprint? We're in Nova Scotia. And in reality, you haven't heard of fossil thorns. Very few museums on the planet have them. Our museums certainly do, because I've become aware of how important they are in you getting a biblical picture of the rocks. Question, were there any thorns when God made man? No. You know, over and over again from Diane and me and Joe, the world was made very good. Now, very good does not include a crown of thorns on your head. Yes, we just had Easter. That's a point we make. The reason Jesus wore thorns on his head is that sin produced not only death, it produced thorns. Question, when you're going to make a rock like this, what's your chronology? If you want a biblical chronology, that rock with those hard thorny bits was not there before Adam sinned. Day one, God made the world very good. Day two, the waters above and the waters below were separated. Now, later on, if I get time, I'll be talking about the waters above. And some people are saying, hey, you can't have waters above anymore, because when they fell down in 40 days and 40 nights, the heat generated would actually blow the earth to pieces. Well, I'm sorry, if it's going to blow the earth to pieces at the start of the flood, it should have blown everything to smithereens when you think of the energy that was poured into planet Earth to separate that right at there on day two. Day three, God raises up the dry land earth. The amount of kinetic energy in shifting the insides of the planet to the outside was unbelievable. Again, enough to melt the earth and to boil all the water off it. But the world is only ever described as a planet that's cool right from the start. So for those of you who are Christians, if you say you believe Jesus turned water into wine, he invented carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and all the other flavorous forms in wine. Yes, H2O was already there, but the amount of energy, if you want to make carbon today, then try a nuclear reaction. And the amount of energy is unbelievable. Even turning water into wine should have vaporized the room if all you did was speak and the elements appeared. So when you look at the waters above on day 3 and you look at the land being raised up, you have a planet which does not have thorns, because the plants, they didn't come till the afternoon of the 3rd day. And you caught that? Because the afternoon of the 3rd day, all of a sudden you have plant life forms. No, not life in the sense that you and I are alive, because we live on a planet in which there are 3 categories. There's the basic elements, the things that are technically dead. And the evolutionists would insist that you regard elements and that as having no life at all. And then they'd move and say, but the plants had life. No, the plants have basic mechanics. That's why you're allowed to eat them. God told Adam he was free to eat the fruit, and he was not to shed any tears over biting out of a pear, because in God's eyes, that is not life as he knows it. And then you'll find that God invented the insects on day 5, and on day 6, he invented man. But only man is ever regarded as a spiritual being who has real life. The life is in the blood. So you'll find that God's category of fossilization must take into consideration the fact that, well, this plant, whatever it was before the thorns developed, and remember Diane's talks, thorns are degenerate structures. Thorns are not creative structures, they're degenerate structures. But you say, how do we know these are hard thorns? Look how black they are. These came out of just below a coal seam, and you could peel off the fossil and the fossil thorn was turned to coal. Why did I mention that? Fossil seaweed. Do you know a fossil seaweed deposit anywhere where the plant carbon has turned to coal? Well, there's one messy brown mulch over there in Sweden. I'm not sure coal is the right word I'd use for it. But in reality, the reason algae and seaweeds don't make coal is they're only 1 cell layer thick. If you want to make a dinkum, that's an Aussie word, a dinkum coal deposit, you need something like bark or thorns where the cell layers are multiple thick. So this plant here, God cursed the earth and it brought forth thorns. Do you realize there were no fossil people until after what? Well, with sin came death. And with death, it was possible to be a fossil, but in reality, there was nothing to bury you quickly. So from Abel, who was buried, right through to Noah's flood, any human body is certainly going to disintegrate, but there's no method of preserving it unless some humans set out to actually manufacture a body that would be like mummies. You could have done that. No record anybody did. And then you have Noah and the flood. So when I look at this thorn here, I'm reminded that that's a post-fall event. This rock here didn't exist till after Adam's sin, which is the reason we love to make these available. See the little dinosaur footprint? This dinosaur footprint was found above that rock in the layers. So if we read them the way the evolutionist does, there were no dinosaurs in the rocks until after Adam sinned. Now, is that too much for you to cope with? Because for many geologists, it is. Because do you know what it says? That rock is not 200 million years old. When it was first labelled Carboniferous over there in England, and you find the same thorns in England as you find in Nova Scotia, it didn't mean 200 million. The guys who invented, the reverend gentleman who invented the word Carboniferous was only concerned about the fact that it had coal or carbon in it. And he had a pretty much close to biblical theory about that. In fact, when you have a look at that whole area, you've got the town of Durham just up a bit not too far away from where the name Carboniferous was invented. And Carboniferous, no, that means a lot of carbon, invented by a clergyman, not 300, not 200, not 100 million years old, but not far from the town of Durham, where the word geology was invented by the clergyman in the town, who decided we need a biblical view of the earth. because they already had a pagan view and he wanted to make a biblical view. Question: if you're listening, are you challenged to actually bring all your thoughts into submission to Jesus Christ? That clergyman was. 1300s? No, they didn't have a theory of evolution. The Greeks had. It hadn't caught on in the West, and he said, we need a new way of thinking about the earth, geologos. He already had theologos, otherwise known as theology, and now he said, we need to bring our thoughts in the earth subject to a biblical picture. So question, given that, how did the fossils form? Well, given that, when did the fossils form? Remember this? Are you biblically thinking? So that fossil did not form until after Adam's sin. That's why we talked about in the last 2 weeks of Easter how thorns were on the head of Jesus Christ, because the coming of sin, the coming of thorns and death was matched by Jesus, who came to pay the price of sin, and he wore thorns and he died to actually pay the price of Adam's sin. So the whole of geology, have you ever thought that it may be the devil's way, the devil's dupe's way of getting rid of the understanding of thorns? Now, I'll be honest, it took me a long time to realize that what's going on here is what dear old Henry Morris said. It's an eternal war against God. So on the one side, you've got Satan trying to make everything God says into a lie. On the other side, you've got God's word saying, no, I was there. Here's what happened. Adam was there. Look what he wrote in Genesis chapter 5. Moses was there. Look what I said to him in Exodus chapter 20. And yes, you heard that right. Exodus 20 begins, the word of the Lord came to Moses and he said, right? It's full of statements like that. So it's not just a human thesis. Whereas when you look at Charles Lyell and Charles Darwin, the present is the key to the past. But don't forget, over and over again, we have reminded you that Lyell, the lawyer who became a geologist, knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to get rid of Moses. Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Don't be surprised it works so well, because I've said over and over again since Ken Ham and I wandered around Australia in the early days, telling people that Jesus said, if you don't believe Moses, you won't believe me. If you don't believe Moses, then you won't understand the resurrection. You won't understand the death of Christ. That is as true now as when Jesus said it back in John's Gospel. It's as true now as when Jesus said it in Luke's Gospel. Read the whole section on the road to Emmaus if you want to see the importance of everything in Genesis 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and beyond. Okay, so we've got some rocks here, and we've got some fossils. You like my nice fossil Chinese fish? Yes, while we could access these, they're not really readily available now, we would sell them. Beautiful little ones from China. But of course, you may notice that the strata actually run that way. And this fish is lying horizontally. This is not a vertical fish. It's not a polystrate fish. It's lying horizontally. So what? Well, do you remember what Joseph shared when he came to Australia and we had a fish farmer come to one of our meetings? He said, we used to worry in our big fish farms about the fish falling to the bottom and taking so long to die. And we still worry about that, because if we don't get them out of there, then all the muck actually makes the water toxic. But he said, we've discovered that there is something else that happens to these fish which fall to the bottom, like in the museums, and they lie there and slowly get buried. That's the normal explanation for this. But as you can see, it's beautifully preserved. That's why they commanded quite a high price, and still do. Now there's so few of them here in Australia that are available. He said, what we see in the real world is as other bed cleaners for the ocean, bed cleaners for the streams, bed cleaners for the rocks that will come in and they'll settle down on the fish, and the fungus will cover that fish within a day or two at the most. And within a very short period of time, the fungus has dissolved everything. There's no trace left of the fish. So point number 2, point number 3, point number 4, point number 5, that fish had to be preserved rapidly, even though it's lying horizontally. It's not a straight fish, except that it's a tiny bit thicker than the layers. So what you've got is a fish that lived, died, and it was buried. Perhaps it was buried and died at the same time, but it did not sit on the bottom like the textbooks say. it would have been dissolved in the next couple of days by that fungus, which seems to be everywhere. You see, when I look at the world that God made, it said God made everything very good. And even though there was no death on the planet, there was still logs, there was still plants that could have floated onto the seafloor. And I don't know about you, but I've seen quite a few floods where the plants came in. In fact, I've seen high tides where the seaweed that came along, it just piles up and everywhere. But in reality, if you want to get rid of that, God had to build a disposal mechanism so that floating in the water are disposers, invisible to most of us, that will actually come and gobble that stuff up. So it's not a permanent pollutant or anything like that. Okay, so we've got just a couple of things before we throw it open to questions again. I brought in a couple of rocks here and some things with a few interesting names in. Just got to reach over and get them. You know what this rock is? It's black, it's shiny, you can burn it. It's from one of our coal seams down near Gunnedah. We've got a lovely coal seam running underneath Jurassic Ark, our outdoor museum. So we know where it is because like that lingular bed, it's a marker bed and it traces through to the next crop, one of the few Jurassic outcrops of coal on the east coast of Australia. But coal, you crack it open and it's full of, hey, I found my thorns just under a layer of carboniferous rock. Carboniferous, carbon, coal. But the word coal is way older than the word carboniferous. In fact, Moses would have understood it because some of you ladies can follow this logic. If you go to the beauty shop, you can buy some KOHL for your eyebrows, black eyeshadow, black eye paint. That's what Moses would have had on his. Remember how he was high up in the Egyptian court? Yes, he'd been taken from the Jewish people. He'd been raised by Pharaoh's daughter. He'd been raised to be the prime minister of Egypt, reality. Look at all the paintings. They painted their eyebrows, the men particularly. They painted their eyelids jet black. Old Egyptian word, kohl. We still use it for eyeshadow. Hence, we call this stuff kohl. And don't be surprised, it's found in association with fossil thorns, whether you're in the Carboniferous rocks or whether you're in the Permian rocks in Australia, where Joseph found, to my knowledge, the first thorns we've ever found in that sequence near Newcastle. You are finding evidence that the coal formed after Adam sinned. Now, can I be brutally blunt? If I'm at a geology conference saying, guys, hey, listen, this coal shows all the evidence of having been formed after Adam's sin. This coal is a massive washed-in deposit. That's not my opinion, by the way. That's what the first geology professor in the whole of the Newcastle region said. Look, the trees have floated in. Look, the composition is wrong. Look, the volcanic ash is full of vertical trees, but no debris. Those trees weren't alive. They were shifted in there. Yes, Professor Sir David Edgewood said those things. But the bit on geology, you see the coal shows evidence now with the finding of the thorns that it only formed after Adam's sin. Now, what happens when I tell other geologists this? They get really cranky. Not because that would make the coal only 6,000 or so years old at the most, but because they don't care how old it is. They only care how old it isn't. Did you catch that? The geologists of the world don't care how old this coal is. They only care how old it isn't. So if I make it a biblical age, they will say my geology is fanciful. They will say my geology has been made up. So take the bit between your teeth out there if you're listening. If you want to have a biblical view of geology, then expect to be opposed. Not because of any error you've made in your judgment about thorns in the coal or thorns in the Bible or whatever, but because the one thing they don't want you to have any view of geology that would put them in reach of the instructions in God's word. You see, if there were no animals on the world on day 1, 2, and 3, then there could be no fossil animals. If there was no flood to bury things until Noah's day, if there was no rain, then you couldn't have fossil raindrops, and you couldn't have fossil people, and you couldn't have fossil animals. And that, of course, in the Bible is associated with judgment. I cannot stress over enough because I get so upset with the pastors like Don McClellan at the moment, who's written a book on how the world must have been millions of years of death and struggle, because that's what science tells us. Well, I'm sorry, Don, the Bible tells you exactly the opposite. The Bible tells you sin brought death and death brought thorns, and therefore the fossils and the judgments that follow on from Adam and through Noah and the Tower of Babel are all in a very short period of time. And that means the God who created can destroy in just as quick and efficient a manner. Well, there's coal. It's the remains of plants. I've pulled enough about this stuff to actually know that you can get all sorts of plants out of there. Down in Bass Strait, there's coal underneath the bottom of the ocean down there, or the Bass Strait, which is quite deep in some places. But the pressure of the water and the pressure of the sediment is actually cooking the coal and turning it into oil. Coal and oil are connected like that. But you see, when you have a look, where's my other piece? Oh, it's gone now. Oh, yes, here it is. When you have a look at the coal that's down there in Bass Strait, and then you look at this, the fact that there's no crystals of quartz in it, you say, what a leap. Well, they're beautiful, aren't they? And this stuff, maybe at the best it's shiny. This is useful for fuel. This, well, we do use them. Remember the old crystal radios? We discovered quartz has got some interesting properties, because you can push it one way and another, and it actually can generate electrical responses. But it's the name that gives it away. We've been telling you the names all along. This is coal. Moses would have understood this word. It doesn't mean millions of years old. It doesn't mean a swamp. It simply means black. This is a crystal. And you may find all sorts of interesting principles out of it, radio signals, etc. It's lovely to cut and use in some of our modern equipment, computers. But where did its name come from? You see, the name itself comes from the old Greeks, who thought it was water because you could see through it. They thought it was water frozen so hard it had not thawed. Stop. You want a biblical perspective? When could we have first invented a word to describe that? As far as we know, there's no evidence that crystal existed before the old Greek concept of frozen stone. There's no evidence we've got that the name is, it goes back to Noah or anything like that. It simply means a rock that was so frozen it had still not thawed out. Two things. It means the Greeks knew about frozen. Well, they had ice and snow on some of the mountains in the north, so we know they knew cold. But where did they get the idea of frozen from? And when could you have first got that idea? Genesis chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? No hint of frozen. Adam and Eve created naked. Yes, you're getting now the picture. The geologist does not reject this story because of what it says. He rejects it because of what it implies about the God who created, very good, the God who therefore owns the universe. So, sorry, Charles Lyell, sorry, Charles Darwin, sorry, David Attenborough, you are not your own. You were made. You are in debt already to the Creator. And sorry, Charles Darwin et al. And Charles Lyell, the present is not the key to the past. What God has said back in the beginning, the world was made very good. Very good. First time I climbed Mount Wellington in Tasmania, I went up to play in the snow. I'd never seen snow in my life. I'd seen ice in the refrigerator, but I got out and I built myself a snowman. I lasted 30 seconds and I thought, this is stupid. Of course, I didn't have any gloves on. I just thought I saw white stuff. No, it could freeze my fingers. It could kill me with frostbite. So when you look at snow and ice, sorry for those of you who think it doesn't look beautiful. There was no such stuff in the first world. Adam and Eve were stark naked. The world was very good. There was no mechanism to drown you in the rain or a flood. There was no flood. That's why even Peter says Noah was a man of faith. He believed those things which had not yet happened. So right up to Noah's flood, there's nothing that's going to destroy you. No cold. Remember the Victorian hymn? Those purple-headed mountains and those snowy covered hills? Sorry, all those are post-flood. All those are the results of degeneration, of God's judgment. Yes, I know the Victorians love to spiritualize so much of that. Yes, it's pretty. And pretty is nice, but pretty is not necessarily good. White snow, beautiful, clean, may be a good picture, of what salvation can do, but it's actually something that can kill you too. So you need salvation. You need saving by Jesus Christ, who is the creator, who was also the judge. So when would you get a name quartz? You might have called it something else before Noah's flood, or perhaps it wasn't even visible till Noah's flood. Remember how on day 3 the planet was lifted up, and on day 4 and 5 and 6 you had a space where man could live. All the plants had grown up. The Garden of Eden is there, and God even calls the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because he pronounces the world very good only after he's made everything. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil was declared good by the Creator. I know that might take some of you a bit of rational thinking to get that through, but God's judgment was, well, you didn't have to eat it. I didn't make you eat it. I gave you 39 billion trees to eat from. Why did you bother with that one? You see, knowing what's right and wrong is actually a good thing in the beginning. And God gave Adam that choice. But would he have seen quartz crystals? Actually, you can stump your finger on this and cut yourself. You can break it open and it gets a nice conchoidal fracture, a sharp as fracture. Perhaps Adam never even saw those. Perhaps it's not until after the earth starts breaking up again. You know how the fountains of the deep broke up and the water came out? And then on the final days of creation, the fountains of the deep are stopped. Yep, the world's been underwater 150 days. And then you've got 150 days plus 10 before the earth is dry enough for Noah to get out of the ark. Did you catch that? You want to build a biblical picture of geology, then you have to include that whole year and 10 days, but only half of it is covered with the water going up and the other half with the water going down. But 3 months before the people in the ark get out, they can actually see the green grass growing. Are you building that into it? But during those fountains of the deep coming out, have you ever imagined what sort of minerals would dissolve in the super pressurized water and actually form crystals? You see, that's how we make it today. We can make these things in less than a day. Otherwise, it'd be too expensive to make computers. We grow our own quartz crystals now. We know how to do it. It doesn't take millions of years at all. That's another lie the evolutionary geologists have spread. It takes a process. It doesn't take time. So when could you have invented the word crystal? Crystal, frozen. Frozen, not melted. It is only after the coming of ice, mentioned in Genesis chapter 3, that you probably had to come up with a word for that. You see, the whole biblical picture, if you want to have a geological view of the history of the world, if you want to figure out where dinosaur poo came from, there's a dinosaur bone and there's some dinosaur poo, then you have to put 2 and 2 together and say nothing existed by itself. God created. So even the big monsters, I'm going to get Sam to show up some of our dinosaur books soon that you'll find very helpful for the kids. But here's a bone and here's a bit of poo. Now, there had to be enough dinosaurs to make the huge quantities of poos we find everywhere. But because we find some dung beetle burrows, the little white bits in the dinosaur droppings, we know another thing. The dinosaur's poo was laying around by the ton and it was buried before the dung beetles had a chance to have a go at it. And again, you're getting back to saying, how could that possibly happen? Well, you need to start thinking about creation in 6 days. You need to start thinking about a good world before thorns. You need to start thinking about God judging the world with thorns and sin and death, and then a judgment like Noah's flood, where you can not only die, but you can be buried. In fact, you'd probably poo yourself senseless almost. Yeah, you ever thought about that? What the flood would have caused? And then, of course, it could bury such amounts of poo in huge quantities so you and I can dig it up. And it's pretty inside because the minerals have replaced things. But it's a reminder of mass death, a reminder of judgment. And that's what this conflict is about. Now, we could go on for ages. I actually prepared a whole PowerPoint here, but we won't have time for that. We'll go back to you, Sam. And can I encourage you, have a look at your questions now. Continue to donate to the ministry. We certainly do need that. And Sam, thank yous for all the donations and bring up the questions.
All right, okay. So we've got some books to show you. The lovely kids' books here. So we've got Who Made All the Dinosaurs? I hope you enjoyed my little song there. And also we've got What Happened to the Dinosaurs as well. This one's got Joe in it. There you go. We've got our that way. There you go. Shows there. There you go. There we go. Have we got any others, John?
Oh, yes, we do have a few. In fact, I've got here the one that Joe has published in England too, What Happened to the Dinosaurs. A great look at the, in fact, it's for kids. Sam, you don't have too many kids at the moment, but I'm sure you'd enjoy doing all the colouring in and the puzzles.
I'd love to do some colouring. However, I've made an observation. It's the wrong way round. Is that anyway because you're in Australia? Everything's all topsy-turvy down there.
Oh, well, there's my right hand. Can you see my right hand? If it's back on the other front, we have been turned around. So, yes, I don't know why that is, but it's sure fun as far as Sam is concerned.
Love it. Right, okay, so we've got around about 4 minutes left of the broadcast. So I think we've got time for thank yous and possibly one more question. You can get all of those books from our stores. If you're in the UK, you can get them from the UK store. And if you're in Australia, you can get them from the Australia store. We are still working on the American store. Throwing up some issues.
Sorry, Craig, can they get them from the Tasmanian Museum?
Most of them, yes.
Good.
There you go. So if you're in Tassie, go see Craig for your creation research fix. If not, go to creationresearch.net. If you're in the UK, just click on UK shop. If you're in Australia, click on Aussie shop. But the UK. It's the US. Sorry, the UK. It's getting late. The US store is still under works, unfortunately, but we are trying to rectify that as quick as we can. Right. Okay. So let's do thank yous. So Doki Doki is coming twice here. So we've got 99 US Centaurus, 100 underlined twice. I'm guessing that means something good. I'm not really down with the kids anymore, but anyway. And then we've got Doki Doki again coming in with 199 US Buckaroos, a thumbs up. There you go. Obviously, someone has been enjoying our content. Right. Okay. So let us choose our final question. This is interesting because we've been talking about sharks' teeth and things like that. This one comes in for Doki Doki. Question: National Geographic thinks fossil shark bite marks on crocodile coprolite is good evidence for evolution and an ancient rivalry. What are your thoughts?
Well, Glenn, you've got the most shark's teeth over there. Go ahead and talk on that one.
Well, they clearly, the shark teeth and the crocodile teeth are found together, but because you find bite marks on it, I don't see how's that prove evolution. I've got a different theory. I have never found shark teeth, and I've found thousands. I've never found shark teeth without finding beer bottles. So my thinking is I know what killed the sharks, and it was the overdose on beer because they're always associated dead sharks with beer bottles. I think that's similar to this line of thinking.
Yeah, well, I must admit, I'm looking forward to the conference where you present that view. You see, the interesting thing is when you look at coprolites, there'll be coprolites on the ocean floor before Noah's flood comes, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of them were picked up in a shark's mouth and spat out. Otherwise, if they were going to eat them, sharks would have no trouble demolishing a defenseless coprolite. Coprolite, by the word, the fancy word for dropping or poo. Food value, I'm not sure there would have been too much food value in a shark coprolite, but in reality, it's an interesting thesis, but it neither helps the theory of evolution. It doesn't help you with the geologic column at all. And National Geographic is well known for a long time. Its aim has been to replace the biblical record. It is totally pro-Darwin, totally pro-Lyell. In fact, when I first fell in love with National Geographic, it was for two reasons. I was a young, virile male, and this was the only pornography available. Yes, I hate to admit that, but that was because you still had the naked women in Africa, and you could get them free of charge in National Geographic. So their reality was a non-Christian view of things, and topped on that was Charles Darwin's evolution, which they have been champions of. albeit beautiful photographs, etc. Commend them for their quality of print and all those sort of things. But they need time to get off the Darwin bandwagon, time to get off the Charles Lyell applause scheme, and time to get back to telling the truth.
All right. Do you want to do one last quick one, or do you want to just leave it there?
No, take one last quick one.
All right, then. This one comes in from George. It's a nice quick one. What does the description without form and void mean?
Without form and void.
Well, exactly what you said, Glenn. What are you going to say, Craig?
Well, as you're saying, we were saying it was formed out of water,
Yes.
by water and out of water. And as you sort of touched on, John, water's a liquid, and liquid doesn't really have a specified shape.
Yeah, I think that's the best
that's
way
in
to
short.
approach it. Yeah. So that when you have a look at the water on day one, the earth was without form and void at the start of the day. You want to be glad God knows his properties of elements so well, properties of compounds. He invented the compounds. So don't be surprised he could walk on water. He invented the stuff, right? He knew his properties inside out. But without form, I still remember learning in sort of physics in grade 9 that liquids have a defined mass, they can have a defined volume, but they don't have any fixed shape. A gas has neither fixed mass or fixed volume. When you have a solid, it's got fixed mass, shape, and volume. So when you look at all of those things, it fits the description of a liquid in the same way as we do if we had a liquid in a container. I can pour it from a square one into a round one with no trouble. And you'd say it's without form and there's nothing living on it. There was not even a protista, not even a euglena in that mix. It was without form and it was empty. So that's where you start in Genesis. And that I don't think we need to expand on that. That's where God started and he added things to it. So on day 3, you find the land is raised up, massive earthquake like there's never been since then until the final times. Read the book of Revelation, read some of those things. They are there for comparison. And by the end of the 3rd day, you have the water in one place, you have the land, you have the plants, and it's on its way to being a beautiful creation and a very good one by day 6. What shame that sin spoiled it. And can I finish by not only handing back to Sam in a moment, but by reminding you that's why Jesus came, because our sin brought thorns and death and judgment, and Jesus' sin came to take away the punishment of sin, and he's freely available for you and me and anybody who wills to receive him as Lord and Savior. But it does mean you'll have to change your thinking on millions of years. It does mean you'll have to change your thinking on how fossils got there. It does mean you'll be unpopular with your professor of geology, but there's nothing we can do about that. Your professor of geology needs to know the truth as well. Sam, over to you to close.
All right. Well, I do hope you guys have enjoyed today's stream. Please make sure to subscribe if you do really like the content. It's free to do. If you're watching on Twitch, make sure you follow. And also, as well, give the stream a thumbs up and slap a comment in. And also, as well, if you do like the stream, you think if someone might enjoy the content, feel free to share it around. Again, it's all free stuff you can do that helps our ministry grow and gets all of the knowledge that you get to other people as well. So any further words from anyone?
Don't forget to join the newsletter, free e-newsletter.
Join the newsletter, guys. It's free. Make sure you do it. I'm going to put I'm spamming this again in the chat. Here we go. There we go. That's it. In there you go. Click that link, sign up to the newsletters. It's free. You get lots of juicy goodies. But anyway, thank you everyone for joining, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.